prayer. God, source of all life, by your word you give light to the soul. Pour out on us the spirit of wisdom and understanding that our hearts and minds may be opened. Amen.
While he was still speaking to the crowds, behold, his mother and brothers were standing outside, seeking to speak to him. 47, someone said to him, behold, your mother and your brothers are standing outside seeking to speak to you. 48, but Jesus answered the one who was telling him and said, who is my mother and who are my brothers? 49, and stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, behold my mother and my brothers. 50, for whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and sister and mother.
A very short segment to finish off chapter 12. You want to be here for the next several weeks afterward because 13 starts the parables, which are probably the most difficult and confusing of all the passages. The passage talks about the importance of family. And I remember when I was a kid, family was very important to both my grandparents. Clara used to have it. Clara's my grandmother on my father's side. She was really into it. And at least once a year, she would call all of the family together. And my grandfather Benny had 7 brothers and 1 sister, so I'm sure you understand how big that family was. It was so big that they had to rent out a hall to have it. Luckily in the Bronx, I know you guys do it too, right? Except you couldn't go to fire halls in the lower Bronx, so you rented out the entire basement of the huge synagogue. And there would be all kinds of people there, all these relatives. And the coolest part about being a kid is there was Louis and Philip, who were twin brothers, identical twins. And they were my grandfather Ben's 2 brothers. And they liked to come up to you, well, Louis did anyway, because Philip was a little, stingy. And he would take one of those nice big silver dollars, remember the ones from the 50s that were real silver, and he would put it in your little hand. Of course, it was bigger than my little hand when I was, 7 or 8. And he would push it in, and he'd say, who am I? And if you said, Louis, you got to keep, did I get the names right? Louis, you got to keep it. Philip never did. You always had to get the name right. And I thought that was pretty cool. So each kid got these silver dollars. And it was like a really big party, like you guys have out here, right? Yours are big parties. And I thought that was pretty cool. Now, they had a giant family. That side of the family and Clara's side, that was huge. Now, we go to my mother's side. Julia would hold the reunions. But Julia was an only child who had an only child who was the daughter of an only child who was the daughter of an only child. You get to the point, we didn't have a family tree there. We just had a big carrot. However, there were several relatives on Abe's side. Abe had 2 sisters. And there would be a smaller party, but that reunion you could hold in their living room because there were very few of us. And in fact, I went looking for the picture. There was a wonderful picture taken in 1935 of all the relatives that were still left in Poland at the time. Because after World War I is when Abe and his family got over here in one of the Liberty boats, or whichever it was called. And unfortunately, that entire group of like 50-some people died in the Holocaust. But they would still have a party, and it was still important. Especially to Julia, that you bring everyone together. And that was pretty cool. Then we come to my parents who hated family. They didn't like doing it, right? They didn't like, see, we got laughs back there. You have some of them too, huh? No, you guys are smart. So we never went. Once Clara died and Julia and Lane moved to Florida, that was it. And one day, about maybe 3 years ago, I started to notice all these names, all these complex names starting to pop up all over Facebook. And so I wrote to my cousin Neil, who happened to be friends with them all, and I said, who are all these people? Because we don't exactly have a common name. And then he said, well, Benny had 7 brothers. They all got married, and these were all the grandchildren going way back. And we didn't know who they were because when Clara died, that was the end of the big parties. And I went, wow, that's kind of sad that we lost contact with all these people. So I have all these cousins. Well, then I went to 23andMe. That's one of those DNA sites. Have anyone done any? Ancestry's one, Family Heritage is one. You should go out and do it because you will be surprised by the results. Because I looked yesterday, and according to 23andMe, now these are people who joined 23andMe by, buying the little kit. I have over 1,100 cousins and second cousins. And I went, say what? I mean, we got people in Washington State and Michigan. We didn't really travel a lot, but there's a little spread in there. There was actually one in Puerto Rico, so I got a Hispanic second cousin. That's pretty cool, I guess. And all these people, I don't know who they are. And some of them go back to my grandmother Julia. Her maiden name was Spitz. All of a sudden, Spitz start popping up all over the place. And so I conversed with a few to find out that my great-grandfather Morris actually had brothers and sisters that I didn't even know he had. And when you start looking and filling in the lines, I understand killing it and it's okay, but it's God's house. I'm only kidding. Wasps are not welcome. Sorry. Anyway, so I got like 1,100 every couple of days or weeks or so go by, and I get another email that says, hey, more of your relatives. I don't know who these people are. But the family is a lot larger than I thought. And if all of you here did your 23andMe's, you'd probably find out even more family that you didn't know about. So family is an important thing. But then we have Jesus talking about family. And he's going to do a redefinition of family that is really radical for his time. And I think to a lot of people looking at it today, it's radical. He actually said that bloodlines are not the important thing to be worried about. Now that's kind of concerning because that's not the way people lived. In those days when your son would get married, he would, build a room onto the house, and he would get married and bring the bride, and that's where they lived. So the nuclear family was always together. And how did most of these villages in Judea and the Galilee start? It started with a family who said, nice place, mine, or was inherited through, remember, Moses and Joshua, and they had this piece of land, and if it had a water source on it, that became your house. So the more water you had, the more kids you ended up with, by the way. That's how it worked. And they built onto the house, and then, of course, the house became so big, you kind of built another one sort of across the street. They didn't really have streets. And before you know it, 500 years go by, and you've got a nice big village. And guess what? Everybody's a relative. That's the way it worked. And family was very important. And parents had even more children than probably some of you as siblings. Like Ben had 7, that's 8, and a sister. So they were 9 in that family. In Jesus' day, that would have been considered a small family. Because if you're running the farm, which 90% of them did, just look at the Amish farms. You need a lot of people to run a farm because they didn't have things like tractors. Wish they did. It would have made life easier. They manually did everything. You had to have a lot of kids to run the farm. And that was a reason that the son stayed with the father and built onto his house, because if he moved away, first he'd have to go buy some land, but more importantly, dad would lose a very valuable worker. So you stayed on the farm. And family was extremely important. Marriages were always prearranged. And according to history, when Israel had the 12 tribes in the entire promised land, they didn't even, I'll just use the word cross-pollinate, but from one tribe to the other, you did not marry. Yeah, I got him laughing in the back. That's kind of funny. Well, you killed a bee. That made me think of cross-pollination. So if you lived in the tribe of Benjamin, you were not going to marry somebody who was in the tribe of Gad. They just didn't do it. But they were all Israelites. They were all cousins, right? They all came from Jacob. That's just not what they did. Now, of course, in Jesus' day, we only have one tribe left. And that's the Judean tribe, the Judah tribe. And during Jesus' day, the clans didn't even intermarry. So you had to marry someone inside of your clan. Now, the clans went back pretty far, so you had somewhat of a selection. So family units, the blood ties, were really, really tight. And then you had Jesus coming in with these radical statements for the day. What was interesting is, how do you know it's radical? And I just want to point this out, because as people were hearing this scripture passage read, they knew he was radical before he got to it, because of his language and the culture of the day. So it was acceptable to stand in like a synagogue or a crowd like the market and say, here are my brothers, my uncles, and my cousins. Accepted, no problem. Notice there's no females in there. To mention this is my uncles and aunts and sisters was not acceptable. Don't ask me why. I couldn't find out why. That's just the way it was, so we'll accept that. So it's unacceptable to say brothers, sisters, and in this case he said mother. Not allowed to do that. So the minute you hear Jesus saying this, who are my brother, my mothers, and whatever, the person in the first century just woke up and said, "Ooh, what's going on here? Something's wrong. This is radical. This caught your attention." Like that really cool rock you, did you like my God Will Rock You video and you caught your attention? Okay, it caught my attention. I spent like 4 hours making it, thank you. Anyway, you would be up on your seat. So Jesus turns around and defines the family. He says, well, they're not my brothers and mother. These people are. And he makes this gesture to help you understand that the listener in the first century already knows what he's going to do. And he totally redefines it. And what he's doing is he's defining the family unit in the kingdom of heaven. And it's anyone who is following him, period. No other criteria. Notice, no bloodlines, no nations, no race. It didn't matter. If you're following him, then you are a member of this family unit, which is part of the kingdom of heaven. Because we are made of three things. We are made of the flesh, and everyone go like that, that's flesh. It's called nephesh in Hebrew. We're also, part of us is called the neshama. That means the spark of God inside of you. Remember Genesis 1:27, and God said we will make humans in our likeness. That's what it means. It means to have the spark of God in you, which gives life and makes us conscious that there is a God out there and gives us sentience. And then the third part is the ruach, or the spirit. You may use the word soul, it's an interchangeable word. But when you die, the flesh doesn't go with him. The neshama returns to God because it's not necessary, and it's your spirit, your ruach, that's going to go to heaven. So the flesh and the bloodlines are meaningless in heaven. That's what he's trying to say. As you join that spiritual family in heaven, bloodlines don't count, and he was trying to tell people, if you're following me and understanding what I'm saying and the teachings from God, then these bloodlines don't mean anything anymore, and they shouldn't count. Okay. He also knew in those days, as still happens today, that there were Hebrews that came to know Jesus. We call them the Jewish Christians, and they joined the movement, if you will. And when that happened, if you remember your book of Acts, a guy named Saul, who eventually becomes Paul, came after them and threw them in prison. And we know that families would kick out anyone who said, oh, I believe in Yeshua, or Jesus the Messiah, would be kicked out. And Jesus was telling them that. It's like you're going to be creating this new family, not just in heaven, but also it needs to be created here on the earth. And there are people today, and I'll tell you, I'm one of them, that when the family found out what I was doing and believed, that was another one of the reasons they said, oh, no, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Well, shame on them for that. But Jesus was telling these new followers that you're going to run into these things, but it doesn't matter. But sometimes when you look at, if you look at the history of the church, you can unfortunately see where that has not happened in history. Not every time in different churches in different places throughout the world do people accept everyone who wants to be. The strangest thing that I read this weekend was that the church of Iraq and Iran are growing. I didn't think they even had a church there anymore, but apparently it is growing. And you know that, I don't have to explain it, because you know that area of the world. Those are Muslim countries, and it is illegal to follow Jesus. Yet the church there is growing. That people are coming together and doing exactly what it said in the book of Acts. They sell and give everything they have to the church. They join what we would call a commune because they have to protect each other, just like they did after Jesus' time. And they work together as this gigantic spiritual family. And it's growing like crazy out there in an area of persecution. Now, we're under persecution today, so we should be growing in the same way, shouldn't we? Because the church is under persecution. All you have to do is listen to the news and you hear about it. But we have to remember that we are all part of this spiritual family that Jesus establishes, in this case, in this section of Matthew 12. And he's telling us, as long as we are believers, as long as we come together to worship God and to worship Jesus, that we are part of the same family. Now, on that note, who's having lunch today and having us all over for lunch? Well, the look of shock just occurred. That's all right. No, the idea is that we are all part of the same family. And we come together to take care of each other. And one of the things that I like about coming here on Sunday is that we feel very welcome as being a part of the family. You may not have noticed this, but we're about to end year number 5. Maybe I shouldn't have told them that. They might say I have enough of this clown. But on July, whatever, 1st, we're going to be around a little bit longer. And we are very happy to be here and to worship God with you, because we are the family of God, aren't we?